Snow drifted against the towering windows of Blackthorn Hall like pale ghosts seeking entry, dissolving upon the glass before they could disturb the warmth within. Inside, beneath 3 crystal chandeliers imported from Venice decades earlier, the winter assembly glittered with aristocratic perfection. Diamonds flashed at throats. Silk skirts swept polished marble. Gentlemen in dark coats bowed with measured grace while a string quartet performed a waltz so delicate it seemed to float above the crowd rather than move through it. Yet for all its beauty, the ballroom possessed a peculiar cruelty of places built for admiration. Every smile concealed a judgment. Every whisper traveled farther than music. Miss Eleanor Vale understood that truth better than anyone present. She stood near a marble column wrapped in winter roses, her gloved hands folded carefully before her as though stillness alone might protect her from notice. Her gown, fashioned from deep blue satin, had once been magnificent. Tonight it was merely respectable, altered twice to disguise age no seamstress could fully conceal. The lace at her sleeve belonged to her late mother. The sapphires at her throat were imitation stones purchased years ago when appearances still mattered more than survival. Not one gentleman had asked her to dance. The realization should not have wounded her after the 3rd hour of neglect, yet humiliation possessed a strange persistence. It returned each time another young lady laughed behind an ivory fan, each time a mother steered her son elsewhere, each time silence greeted Eleanor when she approached a gathering. Society had adored her family once. Before the debts, before the public disgrace of her father's failed investments, before newspapers transformed the name Vale into a polite synonym for ruin. Near the refreshments table, Lady Ashcombe tilted her head toward a cluster of women draped in silver silk. "Poor creature," she murmured, though not softly enough. One almost wishes someone would rescue her from the embarrassment of attending. A ripple of restrained laughter followed. Eleanor lowered her eyes to the polished floor. She had promised herself she would endure the evening with dignity. Her mother depended upon these appearances now. Invitations, however cold, prevented total exile. So she remained motionless while shame tightened quietly beneath her ribs. Across the ballroom, a tall figure stood apart from the dancing couples near the shadowed archway leading toward the terrace. The Duke of Ravensshire. Even among nobility, his presence altered the atmosphere of a room. Ladies spoke more softly when he passed. Men abandoned careless conversation. He was not elderly, though grief had etched severity into features that might otherwise have appeared dangerously handsome. Dark hair, touched faintly with silver at the temples despite his youth, framed a face composed almost entirely of restraint. Society called him cold because it could not imagine another explanation for such distance. Eleanor had seen him only twice before, once at the opera beside his dying wife several years earlier, once at her father's funeral, standing unnoticed beneath the rain after every other guest had departed. Tonight, he watched the ballroom with the expression of a man enduring noise rather than enjoying celebration. Several ambitious mothers had attempted conversation. None remained beside him for long. When his gaze settled briefly upon Eleanor, she looked away at once. It was dangerous to invite attention from powerful men. Women in precarious circumstances learned that lesson early. The orchestra shifted into another waltz. Couples moved gracefully into formation while servants circulated with silver trays of champagne. Eleanor considered leaving before the final dances began. She had survived enough humiliation for one evening. Then Viscount Harland approached. He was handsome in the careless manner of men forgiven too often by society. The scent of brandy clung to him beneath expensive cologne. Eleanor felt unease immediately. "Miss Vale," he said with exaggerated charm, bowing only halfway, "you hide yourself so thoroughly one might mistake you for decoration. I assure you, my lord, no confusion exists." His smile widened at her restraint. "Sharp as ever, though I suspect sharpness has become a necessity." Several nearby guests pretended not to listen. Eleanor attempted retreat. "If you will excuse me—" "Come now," he interrupted softly, stepping closer. "Surely pride becomes exhausting when one possesses so little else." Heat flooded her face. The Viscount lowered his voice further, though every syllable carried. A beautiful woman should not stand alone all evening. It encourages speculation. Men begin imagining whether she might appreciate private arrangements more than respectable courtship. A few ladies glanced away uncomfortably. Others watched with fascination. Eleanor's throat tightened. "You forget yourself, my lord." "No," he replied. "I believe society has simply remembered what your family truly is." The cruelty of the words struck harder because they were spoken gently. For one terrible moment, Eleanor feared tears. Not here. Not before these people. She drew breath carefully, preparing to endure the insult in silence because silence was often the only weapon left to disgrace women. Then another voice emerged behind the Viscount. "Get away from her." The words were quiet. Not sharp, not loud, yet conversation across the ballroom stopped almost instantly. Viscount Holland stiffened before turning slowly toward the speaker. The Duke of Ravensshire stood only inches away, one gloved hand resting behind his back, his expression unreadable beneath the chandelier light. "My Grace," the Viscount said with uneasy laughter, "I intended no offense." The Duke regarded him without warmth. "You mistake cruelty for wit. That error has made you tedious." A stunned hush spread outward through the crowd. No one spoke to Holland that way publicly. The Viscount flushed crimson. "This matter scarcely concerns you." "It concerns me now." The Duke's voice never rose. That somehow deepened his authority. Eleanor stared at him, unable to move. Around them, 100 guests watched in breathless silence while the orchestra faltered into stillness. Even the musicians understood something irreversible had entered the evening. Then, before all of English society, the Duke of Ravensshire extended his arm toward Eleanor Vale, and waited. Morning fog curled through the London streets like breath upon glass, softening carriage wheels, gas lamps, and the stone facade of aristocratic townhouses. By sunrise, the previous evening spectacle at Blackthorn Hall had already escaped into drawing rooms across the city. Ladies discussed it over chocolate and sugared biscuits. Gentlemen repeated the details beside club fireplaces. Some claimed the Duke of Ravensshire had nearly struck Viscount Holland. Others insisted he intended to marry Eleanor Vale out of pity. By noon, society had transformed a single gesture into scandal. Eleanor wished only to disappear from it. She sat beside the parlor window of her Mayfair residence, sewing a loose pearl back onto one of her gloves while her mother pretended not to read the morning paper. The silence between them carried equal measures of hope and dread. "At least they are speaking your name again," her mother said. Eleanor kept her eyes lowered. "Not kindly. Kindness has never interested society." Outside, hooves rattled over wet cobblestones. A delivery carriage stopped before the house. Eleanor assumed another unpaid notice had arrived, until the maid entered carrying a long cream-colored box tied with black ribbon. "No card accompanied it, miss." Her fingers hesitated before lifting the lid. Inside rested a pair of dove-gray gloves crafted from soft kid leather, the stitching so precise it appeared painted rather than sewn. Along the inner wrist, embossed discreetly in silver, were the initials AR. Eleanor touched the gloves as though they might vanish beneath her fingertips. Her mother inhaled sharply. "The Duke sent those." "He sent nothing," Eleanor replied too quickly. "There's no note." Yet she understood immediately why the gesture unsettled her. Gloves were intimate things. A gentleman might send flowers to any lady without consequence. Gloves implied observation. They suggested he had noticed her torn pair at Blackthorn Hall when no one else had noticed anything except her humiliation. That realization disturbed her far more deeply than gossip. For 3 days she attempted avoidance. Invitations she still possessed were declined politely. Walks through Hyde Park occurred only during unfashionable hours. She convinced herself the Duke's intervention had been chivalry born from irritation rather than interest. Then she saw him again. The conservatory at Halford Square overflowed with orchids and candlelight during a charitable music hall attended by half the city's elite. Eleanor had nearly escaped unnoticed when a hush rippled through the crowd near the entrance. The Duke of Ravensshire had arrived. Women shifted instantly toward him like flowers bending toward dangerous sunlight. He acknowledged none of them. Tall and severe in black evening attire, he removed his gloves slowly while scanning the room with calm. Then his gaze found Eleanor. The sensation was not romantic. It was worse. It felt precise. Before she could retreat, he crossed the conservatory directly toward her. Conversations dimmed behind him. "Miss Vale," he said with formal restraint, bowing slightly. "Your Grace. I trust your evening is less unpleasant than the last." A flicker of dry humor touched his voice so briefly she almost doubted hearing it. "It has only just begun," she replied. For the first time, she witnessed something dangerously close to amusement in his eyes. Nearby matrons stared openly now. Eleanor could feel speculation tightening around them like wire. "You should not speak with me so publicly," she murmured. "Why?" "Because London delights in destroying women attached to scandal." His expression hardened faintly. "Then London must discover new amusements." The musicians resumed playing. Before Eleanor could answer, Lady Whitmore approached surrounded by jewel companions whose smiles carried the sharpness of knives concealed in velvet. "How charitable of you, Your Grace," Lady Whitmore purred. One rarely sees dukes rescuing distressed ladies twice in the same week. Silence spread immediately. Eleanor felt heat crawl into her throat. "Lady Whitmore, there's no need." "But there's every need," the older woman interrupted sweetly. "Young women without fortune often misunderstand male attention. One hates seeing hope bloom where permanence cannot possibly follow." Cruel laughter flickered among the surrounding guests. The Duke regarded Lady Whitmore with chilling stillness. "How fortunate, then, that my intentions require no interpretation from others." The woman's smile faltered. Then, before anyone recovered, he turned toward Eleanor and extended his arm exactly as he had at Blackthorn Hall. "Would you honor me with a walk, Miss Vale?" The conservatory seemed to stop breathing. Eleanor knew refusal would preserve her safety. Acceptance would ignite every rumor already poisoning society against her utterly. Yet beneath the chandeliers, surrounded by orchids and whispers and sharpened smiles, she saw something unfamiliar within the Duke's composure. Not pity, certainty. Slowly, she placed her hand upon his arm. The walk carried them through candlelit corridors lined with mirrored panels and enormous palms imported from India. Rain tapped softly against the glass ceiling overhead. The Duke neither hurried nor filled silence unnecessarily. Strangely, that restraint calmed her more than charm could have done. "You enjoy frightening people," Eleanor said quietly. "No, I simply ceased arranging myself for their comfort years ago. And now," his gaze lingered ahead, "now I find myself increasingly unwilling to arrange myself away from you." Her pulse stumbled unexpectedly. Before she could answer, they reached the outer terrace overlooking the square below, where fog blurred the city into silver shadow. A servant approached silently, carrying a small parcel wrapped in dark paper. "For Miss Vale, Your Grace." The Duke accepted it without surprise and handed it directly to Eleanor. Inside lay a slender volume of poetry bound in navy leather. Several passages had been marked delicately in pencil. One line, written beside a poem about surviving hardship, caught her breath entirely. "For those forced to endure unkind seasons." No signature accompanied the inscription. None was necessary. When Eleanor looked up from the page, she discovered the Duke watching her with an intensity far more dangerous than open affection. And for the first time since society had cast her aside, she realized she was no longer standing alone within its cruelty. Rain descended across the countryside, turning the road to Ravenshire Manor into mud beneath the carriage wheels. Eleanor sat opposite the Duke of Ravensshire, wrapped in a wool cloak, listening to water strike the roof above them. The return journey from a charitable luncheon should have lasted 2 hours. Instead, thunder rolled across the hills while the horses strained against the storm. "You are cold," the Duke observed. "I am perfectly comfortable, Your Grace." "You are shivering." Before she could protest, he adjusted the carriage lantern until warmer light spread through the compartment. The small gesture unsettled her more than flirtation. Outside, one wheel struck uneven ground. The carriage lurched. A sharp crack split through the storm. Moments later, the driver's muffled curse reached them through the rain. The Duke stepped into the downpour without hesitation. Through the blurred window, Eleanor watched him speak briefly with the driver. "An axle has broken," he said upon returning. "Ravensshire Manor is nearer than the village. We shall remain there tonight until repairs are possible." A single unmarried woman spending the night beneath a Duke's roof bordered scandal. Spending the night beneath Adrian Ravenshire's roof invited ruin. Yet lightning illuminated the countryside while rain battered the carriage. She nodded once. "Very well." Ravensshire Manor emerged from the darkness, vast and severe against the rain-filled sky. Towering windows glowed amber while iron gates groaned open before the approaching horses. The estate resembled a fortress more than a fashionable home. Servants appeared beneath the portico carrying lanterns. None seemed surprised by Eleanor's arrival. Inside, warmth wrapped around her at once. Firelight flickered across oak walls lined with ancestral portraits whose solemn expressions seemed to follow movement through the corridors. The manor smelled of cedar smoke, old books, and winter roses. A housekeeper guided Eleanor upstairs while maids prepared guest chambers. Before disappearing down the corridor, the Duke paused beside the staircase. "You will dine when you have rested," he said. "There is no obligation to endure formality tonight." The remark sounded considerate from a man famous for emotional distance. Her chamber overlooked gardens drowning beneath rain. After changing into a dry burgundy gown borrowed from the manor stores, Eleanor studied herself in the mirror and discovered she looked younger without the rigid composure London demanded of her. Dinner unfolded within a smaller dining room illuminated by candles. Shadows trembled against the walls while rain murmured beyond tall windows. The Duke occupied the opposite end of the table, though the distance between them felt less severe than before. For several minutes only silverware disturbed the silence. Then he spoke unexpectedly. "You apologize too often." Eleanor looked up. "I beg your pardon." "There," he replied quietly. "Again." Embarrassment colored her cheeks. "Habit, perhaps." "No, conditioning." The word lingered heavily between them. She lowered her eyes toward her untouched wine. Women in precarious circumstances learn quickly how little space they are permitted to occupy comfortably. Something unreadable crossed his expression. After dinner he led her toward the library, where enormous shelves stretched upward into darkness above a crackling fire. The room felt less like part of a manor than part of a private mind hidden from the world. "You read Byron?" Eleanor asked. "I distrust cheerful literature." A reluctant laugh escaped her before she could suppress it. The sound altered the atmosphere. The Duke became very still, as though startled by hearing joy within his own home. "You rarely laugh," he observed. "Neither do you." No. Rain hammered the windows harder while thunder rolled across the estate. Eleanor wandered slowly between shelves until her fingers brushed a framed miniature portrait half, concealed beside several books. A beautiful dark-haired woman gazed outward from painting. "The Duchess," Eleanor said gently. The Duke did not answer at first. Finally he crossed toward the fireplace, one hand resting against the mantel. "She was 17 when we married," he said, terrified of disappointing everyone around her. "We spoke politely for 3 years and honestly for none." "Did you love her?" Eleanor asked. "I failed her." The simplicity of the words hollowed the room. "She died during winter," he continued after a moment. "London preferred blaming my coldness to acknowledging how thoroughly society destroys frightened women." Firelight flickered across his face, revealing exhaustion hidden beneath discipline. Eleanor understood that his silence had never been arrogance. It was grief sharpened into armor. "Why me?" she asked quietly. His eyes lifted toward hers. "Because when they wounded you," he said, "you thanked them for the blade." Emotion caught painfully inside her chest. Neither moved. The fire cracked softly between them while shadows swayed along towering shelves. Eleanor stepped nearer almost without realizing it. The Duke reached toward a book resting beside his shoulder at precisely the same moment she did. Their hands brushed briefly. Heat surged through her instantly. His breath faltered. "You deserve gentleness," he said, barely above a whisper. Eleanor's pulse trembled violently now. "I do not wish to be protected, Your Grace." "Then what do you wish?" Her answer emerged before caution could restrain it. "To be seen." Something inside him broke silently. He looked at her then not with duty or fascination, but with unmistakable longing. "You terrify me, Miss Vale," he confessed. Slowly, impossibly, he lifted one hand toward her face. A knock sounded sharply at the library door. Both stepped apart immediately. "The carriage repairs are complete, Your Grace," a servant announced. Silence flooded the room once more, though nothing within it resembled the silence before. At dawn, Eleanor descended the staircase wrapped in traveling furs while servants bowed warmly as she passed. Outside, snow covered the grounds in silver. The Duke escorted her toward the waiting carriage, yet every restrained movement between them carried unbearable awareness. As the horses began pulling away, Eleanor glanced back through the frosted window. Adrian Ravenshire remained standing alone beneath the gray morning sky, watching a departure with the expression of a man realizing too late that loneliness had finally met its equal. Winter descended upon London with merciless elegance. Frost silvered carriage roofs along Grosvenor Square while servants scattered salt across marble steps before arriving guests. Inside the Royal Conservatory ballroom, Hundreds of candles burned beneath vaulted ceilings painted with cherubs and storm clouds, their light reflecting through mirrored walls until the chamber appeared suspended inside fire itself. The Winter Sovereign Gala had become the social event of the season, and every noble family crowded its glittering floors tonight for one reason beyond politics or entertainment. They had come to witness scandal. Eleanor Vale felt their curiosity before she even entered the ballroom. Conversation softened when she appeared beside her mother at the top of the staircase. Fans shifted, heads inclined together. The orchestra continued its waltz, yet the music seemed distant beneath aristocratic attention. She wore silver silk chosen deliberately for its simplicity. No jewels adorned her throat except the small sapphire pendant her father had given her before ruin consumed their family. Weeks earlier she might have attempted invisibility. Tonight she merely hoped to survive the evening without humiliation. That hope vanished almost immediately. "Miss Vale," Lady Penhurst called sweetly from beside the champagne tables. "How courageous of you to attend." Several women nearby concealed smiles behind crystal glasses. Eleanor stopped gracefully. "One should not disappoint an invitation, my lady." "Indeed," Lady Penhurst replied, "though some invitations are offered from charity rather than desire." The insult landed precisely as intended. Eleanor felt her mother tense beside her. Around them, guests pretended fascination with flowers and music rather than the cruelty unfolding openly before them. Then another voice emerged nearby. Charity rarely produces such crowded audiences. The women turned instantly. Lord Ashcombe stood beside the staircase, having spoken only because the Duke had entered directly behind him. Adrian Ravenshigh across the ballroom without haste, though the crowd parted before him. Black evening attire sharpened the severity of his features. When he reached Eleanor, his attention settled upon her. "You look unwell," he said quietly. "I am merely tired." "No," he replied. "You are wounded." The honesty of the observation nearly unraveled her composure. Lady Penhurst recovered first. "Your Grace, society has become terribly concerned for Miss Vale's reputation. Familiarity invites misunderstanding. Then society should endeavor to think less maliciously." The surrounding silence deepened. No one contradicted Adrian Ravenshigh publicly anymore, not after his repeated appearances beside Eleanor despite growing criticism across London. Yet judgment continued sharpening around them. As the evening progressed, Eleanor endured whispers drifting through the ballroom like poisonous perfume. The Duke pities her. She trapped him cleverly enough. No respectable family would permit such attachment. Each remark struck differently because part of her feared they might be true. Adrian had offered kindness unlike anything society allowed disgraced women. Eleanor trusted him increasingly, which frightened her more than cruelty ever had. Near midnight, she escaped onto a marble balcony overlooking the frozen gardens below. Snowflakes drifted through pale moonlight while distant violins echoed behind closed doors. "You vanish whenever injured," the Duke said softly behind her. She turned sharply. "And you follow whenever I do. I would apologize if it displeased you." "It should, but it does not." His calm certainty weakened her defenses dangerously. Eleanor gripped the balcony railing. "You cannot continue this." "This?" "Standing beside me while society sharpens knives around your throat." He moved nearer, dark coat stirring in the winter wind. "Do you imagine I fear them?" "I imagine they can destroy reputations." "One already destroyed yours," he answered quietly. "I see little virtue in permitting them another victim." Emotion tightened inside her chest. "You speak as though my suffering belongs personally to you." His gaze held hers. "Perhaps it does." Before she could answer, ballroom doors burst open behind them. "Your Grace," called Sir Malcolm Everley loudly, his flushed expression revealing too much champagne. "London wonders whether you intend marriage or merely entertainment." Several nearby guests had followed him onto the balcony, eager for spectacle. Eleanor stepped backward immediately, shame flooding her skin. Sir Malcolm laughed carelessly. Surely even a duke recognizes a distinction between compassion and suitability. The insult echoed through the frozen air. Adrian became utterly still. Then, without removing his eyes from Eleanor, he extended one gloved hand toward her. "Dance with me." Shock rippled through the watching guests. The orchestra had already begun another waltz inside the ballroom. Aristocrats now stared openly as the Duke of Ravenshire escorted Eleanor Vale back across the threshold and onto the center of the dance floor. Whispers exploded around them. He placed one hand against her waist with restrained gentleness. "Look at me," he murmured. "I cannot endure this." "Yes," he said softly, "you can." They moved together beneath blazing chandeliers while hundreds watched in astonishment. Eleanor heard neither music nor conversation now. She knew only the warmth of his hand through silk gloves and the terrifying steadiness of his gaze. "I would rather lose society entirely," Adrian said quietly, "than lose the woman they taught me how to need." Her breath caught. Emotion overwhelmed her so suddenly she nearly stumbled. His grip tightened protectively. Across the ballroom, Sir Malcolm muttered something scornful to nearby companions. Adrian heard it instantly. The dance stopped. Silence swept outward once more as the Duke turned toward the watching crowd. "Let it be understood tonight," he said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the ballroom, "that any insult offered toward Miss Eleanor Vale shall henceforth be considered an insult directed toward the future Duchess of Ravensshire." Gasps shattered the stillness. Eleanor stared at him in disbelief while astonishment rippled through every corner of the ballroom. Adrian faced Eleanor again then, all severity gone from his expression. "Marry me," he said quietly. The ballroom disappeared around her. Every humiliation, every whisper, every lonely evening seemed to gather inside that single impossible moment. He stood before all of London prepared to sacrifice reputation and acceptance to spare her another wound. Tears burned behind her eyes. And still she could not answer. Dawn arrived beneath falling snow, softening the sharp edges of London into silver and white. Carriages moved slowly through sleeping streets while church bells echoed above frost-covered rooftops. Inside the Vale residence, Eleanor stood before her mirror wearing a wedding gown she had once believed she would never deserve. The satin was ivory rather than pure white, chosen deliberately because innocence had long ago ceased defining either her life or Adrian Ravenshire's. Tiny pearls shimmered along the sleeves. Her mother fastened the final buttons with trembling hands. "You may still refuse him," she whispered. Eleanor met her reflection quietly. "That is precisely why I cannot." The previous night had transformed London. By sunrise, every newspaper carried some version of the Duke's declaration at the Winter Sovereign Gala. Some praised his devotion. Others condemned his recklessness. None of it altered the truth growing steadily within Eleanor's heart. For the first time in years, someone had chosen her publicly instead of merely tolerating her privately. Marriage to Adrian would not end society's cruelty. It would simply place them together against it. Eleanor understood now that love within aristocratic circles demanded courage as much as affection. She feared becoming another burden attached to his already isolated life. Outside, another carriage arrived. "The Duke is early," her mother murmured. When she descended the staircase, Adrian stood beside the entrance hall fireplace dressed in black formal attire that rendered him almost severe enough to match the winter beyond the windows. Snow rested across his shoulders where flakes had melted slowly into dark wool. He looked toward her at once, and forgot to breathe. No compliment followed. None was necessary. The expression in his eyes carried something deeper than admiration. It carried disbelief softened by longing. "You came yourself," Eleanor said quietly. "There existed no force capable of keeping me away." For several moments neither moved. Servant pretended fascination with flower arrangements while Eleanor's mother tactfully disappeared. Adrian crossed the distance between them slowly, as though approaching something fragile. "You have not answered my question," he said at last. Eleanor's heartbeat stumbled. "You proposed before half of England." "I would have proposed before the entire empire if necessary." "Why?" His gaze never left her face. "Because every room without you has begun feeling unbearable." She had spent years unnoticed, so being loved openly still felt frightening. Adrian, however, looked at her as though she were not merely desired, but essential. "I am afraid," she admitted. "So am I." A man like Adrian Ravensshire should have seemed untouchable, yet beneath his composure she recognized the same vulnerability haunting herself. They were not rescuing one another from loneliness. They were walking willingly into uncertainty together. He reached carefully for her hand. "Eleanor," he said softly, "if you ask me to leave now, I will, but I cannot promise I shall survive it gracefully." A tear slipped free before she could stop it. "Then you are a foolish man, Your Grace," she whispered. "Undeniably." and I believe I have become a foolish woman. At last, a faint smile touched his mouth. It transformed him completely. The severity people feared dissolved instantly beneath warmth he had hidden from the world for years. Eleanor realized then that London had never truly known Adrian Ravenshire at all. Society had mistaken restraint for absence of feeling because genuine tenderness frightened people accustomed to performance. The wedding took place at St. Augustine's Cathedral beneath grey skies and drifting snow. Many noble families declined attendance despite receiving invitations. Yet those who came witnessed something rarer than aristocratic approval. They witnessed devotion stripped of pride. Adrian never released Eleanor's hand during the ceremony. His attention remained fixed upon her even while the bishop spoke solemn vows echoing through candlelit arches. When Eleanor promised to stand beside him through hardship and judgment alike, emotion flickered openly across his face for the first time. Outside the cathedral, winter air rushed against them while bells rang overhead. Reporters shouted questions. Snowflakes tangled within Eleanor's veil. "Your Grace," one journalist called loudly, "do you regret defying society for love?" Adrian glanced toward Eleanor before answering. "No," he said simply. "I regret only the years I spent believing affection required permission." Inside the carriage awaiting them, warmth enclosed a newly married couple while horses stamped impatiently against frozen pavement. Then Eleanor laughed softly. Adrian looked startled. "What troubles you?" "Nothing." She touched his gloved hand gently. "I was merely wondering whether loving me publicly has proven terribly dreadful." Then, slowly, the Duke of Ravensshire smiled again. Truly, the expression carried years of buried grief breaking apart beneath relief. Fine lines appeared beside his eyes. Warmth softened every harsh angle of his face until he resembled not the feared Duke whispered about within drawing rooms, but simply a man astonished by happiness. Eleanor stared at him. "What is it?" he asked. "They said you never smiled." "I never had reason." The carriage began moving through snow-covered streets while citizens paused to watch from crowded sidewalks. Others stared in confusion at the impossible transformation of the coldest man in England. Adrian lifted Eleanor's hand slowly to his lips. "They will speak about us for years," she murmured. "Let them. And if society never forgives me." His thumb brushed gently across her knuckles. "My Duchess," he said quietly, "society already taught us exactly how fragile its approval truly is." Outside, church bells continued ringing across the winter city while snow fell steadily upon rooftops and silent carriage tracks. Behind them remained ballrooms filled with judgment, whispered cruelty, and people who mistook dignity for weakness. Ahead waited uncertainty, scandal, and the difficult work of building tenderness within a world that preferred coldness. He chose tenderness instead of pride. Yet as the carriage disappeared into the white London afternoon, Eleanor rested her head against Adrian's shoulder and understood something extraordinary at last. The loneliest man in England had crossed an entire ballroom to save her from humiliation, and in doing so, he had unknowingly saved himself.